claims, dangerous and destructive. Let's talk about the big picture. What sort of impact could they have? What does it matter if a presidential candidate talks like this? Let's bring in my political panel. With me, CNN senior media correspondent, host of Reliable Sources, Brian Stelter. In D.C., Philip Bump of The Washington Post. Thank you, gentlemen, both for being here. Thanks. Brian, you dug into this big time on your show this morning, and you opened by saying this is Trump's biggest lie. Why does it concern you so much, right? Because some folks would say, oh, they're just words and this is a heated election. You say.
Because this is the foundation of the House, and every room in the House, every wall in the House, everybody inside the House, we all depend on the foundation of the House, the integrity of our voting system. What Donald Trump says, even though they're just words, are taken very seriously by his supporters. And we've heard some of his supporters talk openly about wanting a revolution, wanting a coup, if there's to be a Clinton election in about 3 weeks. Now, we shouldn't paint with a broad brush here, right? We're talking about a fringe kind of Trump supporter who actually believes that and buys into that. But even just a small subset of Trump supporters who believe the election is not real, is not valid, is a big problem for all of us.
Let's listen to what one of his, biggest name advisors and surrogates, Rudy Giuliani, former New York City mayor, said this morning on CNN to Jake Tapper about a rigged election.
There are a few places, and not many in the swing states. There are a few places where they've been notorious for stealing votes. Pennsylvania, Chicago. There have been places where a lot of cheating has gone on over the years. If you want me to tell me that I think the election in Philadelphia and Chicago is going to be fair, I would have to be a moron to say that. I would have to dislearn everything I learned in 40 years of being a prosecutor.
Now, Philip, he was talking about the 2012 election in Philadelphia specifically, and Tapper pointed out to him, look, the Republican Party of Philadelphia said that is a baseless claim. They themselves said that. But, what does it mean that even Rudy Giuliani is saying this happens?
Well, I think what it means this year is that Rudy Giuliani is fully on Team Trump, which we already knew. I think that it's hard to overstate the fact that there's simply no reason to think that the election is rigged, that voter fraud occurs on the scale that would actually affect the results. If you're going to talk about voter fraud in Chicago, you're talking mostly about going back to the 1960 presidential election, which of course was over 50 years ago. It's simply not the case that elections are decided by voter fraud. In Philadelphia, as you said, the state of Pennsylvania admitted there was no voter fraud in the state after that 2012 election. The question is, Brian's right that this is something which obviously the having trustworthy elections, having people have confidence in the results of the elections is central to our democracy. But it's not as though there is any evidence of it, right? This is simply a rhetorical point that is absolutely baseless. And I think for that reason alone is something that a presidential nominee shouldn't be saying.
And I think the question becomes, what kind of behavior does talk like this embolden, right? So here's a prime example. It's getting a lot of attention. This is a new Boston Globe article. They're tweeting a 50-year-old man who is a contractor, who is a big Trump supporter. Here's what he told the Globe, quote, "If she, Hillary Clinton, is in office, I hope we can start a coup. She should be in prison or shot. That's how I feel about it. We're going to have a revolution and take them out of office. That's what it takes. There's going to be a lot of bloodshed." And then the Globe goes on to say that he then placed a Trump mask on his face and posed for pictures. So, the bridge from words to action, Brian.
That kind of description, that kind of comment is what I would describe as a fringe view. It's important to say many Trump supporters would condemn that just like many Clinton supporters would. But that said, this is why this issue of this rigged election idea has to come up at the debate on Wednesday. This is why Trump needs to be asked about it in a very forceful way. A couple weeks ago at the first debate with Lester Holt, Trump indicated that he would accept the result of the election.
Right.
Now he seems to be wavering again by talking about the idea that these polls are going to be rigged. We should just mention to our viewers, elections are run on a state level by both Democrats and Republicans. It's a bipartisan effort. So even if someone wanted to rig an election, it would be essentially impossible to do so. There are people that investigate. There are ways to prosecute cases of voter fraud when they do happen. They're rare, but they do happen. So there are actually a lot of systems and practices and checks and balances already in place for this. And Trump is ignoring all of that, which is why the pressure's on Chris Wallace to bring this up on Wednesday.
Look, and we know he is a phenomenal interviewer, and he's going to push hard on both sides. No question, it will come up. What will the answer be? We'll see. Let's talk about 2012, because this isn't a new line of thought or things that Trump has said. I mean, Philip, when you look back at his Twitter feed after the night Romney lost on election night in 2012, he called the election a total sham. He said the Electoral College was a disaster for democracy. He also claimed that the Emmys were rigged on a different night. He said the process wasn't fair and the awards were, quote, all politics because, like The Apprentice didn't win. This is not a new line of commenting for Trump.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump hates to lose. He hates to lose. He doesn't want to lose, right? And so he establishes all these systems where it wasn't his fault that he lost. Look at Iowa, right? The Iowa caucuses, he was expected to win. Ted Cruz out-hustled him on the ground and ended up winning the Iowa caucuses. That night, Donald Trump was very gracious and came out and gave a very nice speech. But then in following days, he was saying how Ted Cruz cheated and how his folks were sending out text messages about Ben Carson and yada, yada, yada. And this is what Donald Trump does. And it's absolutely the case.
But then, Philip, what does he say if he wins? What does he say if he wins? Did he won unfairly?
Right. No, I mean, he can't lose on this argument because then he just says, of course, the whole thing was fair and I beat the rigged system. I mean, we've seen him make this argument before. And I think it's worth pointing out that at that first debate, he was fairly close in the polls. And that's why I think he was willing to say, oh, no, I'll accept the result. He's no longer close in the polls.
Yeah, I mean, he hates to lose, but if after Election Day a sizable minority of the U.S. population doesn't accept the results, and if they're led by someone like Trump who supports that idea and feeds that idea and promotes it on Twitter and on TV, then we all lose.
I mean, and you remember what Al Gore did in 2000, right? He conceded when the Supreme Court came down with their decision. He conceded, and he said, that's it. The decision's been made. Philip, thank you. Brian, thank you very much. Coming up this hour, WikiLeaks releasing more